It is NaNoWriMo, so the channel is on a reduced video schedule, but on a video schedule nonetheless. Today we're going to talk about a concept that most communists and many socialists subscribe to, and it is very fascinating to me because though this concept is foundational to understanding Marxism, actual people who understand this concept seem to be rather few. Personally, I'm neither a communist nor a socialist. I don't really like putting labels on myself politically because it just invites people to, you know, claim that you believe things that you don't actually believe. I'm all about like ethics and policy and specifics. But if you do need a reason to dismiss anything I say out of hand instead of actually engaging with it, you can pretty much solidly locate me in like the individualist far left corner of the political spectrum. My goal here is to bring people who talk about politics and those who listen to people who talk about politics on the same page as to what words mean. Because right now what happens in most political discussions that I get to witness is that people will just fling specialized terms at each other that mean completely different things if you have a mildly different set of political views. And then after no valuable information is exchanged, they will go back to their respective echo chambers and post their epic owns of the opposition. God forbid we adhere to the maxims of communication, then we'd have to engage in actual discourse. So if you're not a communist, one of the things that you might know about them for certain is that they want to take away your house, your car, and your anal beads. After all, the one thing that you have been told about communists is that they want to abolish private property. And whenever you ask a communist whether they want to abolish private property, they will say yes, we really want to abolish private property. This is then usually followed by a long diatribe as to how private property is evil and anything but collective ownership of all private property is oppressive to the proletariat. So you leave that monologue thinking that yes, communists do indeed wish to take away your house, your car, and your anal beads. The thing is, that's not what the communists meant at any point. Most Marxists make a distinction between personal property and private property. They do not want to take away your house, your car, and your anal beads because those are your personal property. You have acquired them through the fruits of your own labor, and so you get to restrict who uses them, and that also includes you having the right to say that only you get to use them. Private property is a little more iffy, but I'll give you an example and you'll find that it's actually quite intuitive. A farm would be private property, so no one is allowed to own a farm. Instead, depending on what flavor of leftist you ask, the farm is either supposed to be owned by the public or by the laborers who work on it. I recently made a video about worker-owned co-ops. That is what this is, effectively. There is no person or group of persons that owns the farm and pays workers to work their farm, thereby essentially profiting off the labor of those workers, potentially not even having to work themselves. That is a big no-no in Marxism. Getting something that isn't like the barest necessities to live without having worked for it. Instead, all of the people who actually work the farm get a cut of the profits. And it really, once again, depends on what specific flavor of Marxist you ask how that is distributed, but usually it's the more work you put in, the greater your share of the profits when the product that the farm produces is sold. Ultimately, the idea behind this is that the individual worker will make more money because there's no middleman in the form of a property owner or, God forbid, a venture capitalist investor who takes away a share for themselves without actually having put in work on the farm. This is where the whole idea of capitalism being theft comes from, because you basically get to take a part of the money that really should go to your workers for yourself simply because you happened to have money ahead of time. Now you can apply this concept to factories, electrical dams, hotels even, any kind of business, but also things that we would consider public land. National parks in the United States, for instance, are public property. They are not owned by any group of persons, but by all persons who are citizens of the United States. And yes, in practical terms, this means that they are owned by the government, because somebody needs to administer those national parks so they do what they're supposed to do. They need to be properly coordinated so they are actually protected from the things that national parks are supposed to be protected from. And, you know, ideally, a government actually does represent the will of its constituents. Of course, in practice, that is rarely entirely the case, but for the purposes of this video, that's neither here nor there. And to stick with the national parks example for a hot minute here, even you could ask in America especially, the most hyper-capitalist, extreme ANCAP libertarian child labor enthusiasts, and they will go, I hate the federal government, but damn if the national parks program ain't cool. Private property that should be publicly owned also includes public artifacts like statues or many works of art. Basically anything that you don't use for pretty much exclusively personal purposes. Or also means of production that you own for yourself. Like, for instance, for most Marxists, the camera I'm recording this on, even though it is a means of production, I have it as my personal property because I am the only person who uses it to do my job. Also, according to most Marxists, I wouldn't be allowed to rent out this camera to someone else because then they'd have to pay me a part of the money that they made simply because I had the money to get a camera ahead of time and I didn't really contribute any labor, I just gave them some of my means of production. There are borderline cases where the lines are very blurry and often the answers there depend on, again, what flavor of leftist you ask. That's a bit of a thematic through line when talking about leftism, Marxism, socialism, communism. Everybody thinks that their particular personal definitions are the absolute correct ones and all of the other ones are wrong and evil. So some people will tell you that you are allowed to hang a Van Gogh in your living room if you manage to purchase it with money that you made through honest labor, whereas other people will tell you that you're not even allowed to own a Van Gogh if you directly personally inherited it from the man itself, because a Van Gogh is always a piece of art of such prominence that it must be public property, and so it gets put in a museum where people can go for free. Another gray area would be if you owned a farm and did all of the work to run the farm yourself, which some people would say that's completely okay, whereas others would go, oh, you are actually depriving a lot of workers of an opportunity to work. Which, I mean, you know, to be fair, once you get past the vegetable garden state of a farm, it's pretty much impossible to run it as a one-man operation. But why didn't you know about any of this if it's such a foundational thing to understand when talking about Marxism? There is a lot of communists who at this point go, oh yeah, that's because of the capitalist propaganda of the CIA and shit. And let's be clear, Ben Shapiro is not aware of this distinction because he lacks education in the topic of Marxism. But also, if we're entirely honest with ourselves, Marxists have no one but themselves to blame. In the entire time that I have talked to all kinds of leftists, which is basically my entire political life because I've always been on the far left politically, not once has any of them even considered explaining to me the difference between personal and private property. Even when it should have been obvious that I was talking about a very different thing than the thing they were talking about. Best case scenario, they will mock you for not knowing something that they will vaguely allude to before they run away to their communist friends to brag about how they owned an idiot lib. Maybe they'll call you a class traitor because you own private property. That's always a good one. This has always struck me as just being incredibly weird, and I use it in an ironic way as evidence for my tongue-in-cheek theory that people who are political extremists do not have a theory of mind. In all of modern Western society and most of the world, your house, your car, and your anal beads are considered private property. Only devout Marxists who read theory define these words differently. And let me tell you something, even amongst Marxists, only nerds read theory. To never even point out that you do not mean the same thing when you say private property as the person you are talking to means when they hear private property, it's so stupid. You have to be aware of this. I refuse to believe that communists just go about their day thinking that the personal definition that they subscribe to of personal versus private property is also the definition that the rest of the world universally uses. It is not possible to be that dumb. To not, in actual discourse, even attempt to create a common basis of communication through which ideas can be exchanged. When Ben Shapiro goes out there and says communists want to take away your private property, that means your house, your car, and your anal beads, and you then complain to your communist friends that Ben Shapiro isn't using the correct definition of private property while at the same time refusing to explain it to anyone outside of your bubble, that is bad praxis. You have to know that the West Virginia coal worker with whom you think you have class solidarity from your university-educated middle-class ass doesn't know what you mean when you say private property. You have to understand that. You are actively hindering the spread of leftist ideas and contributing to them getting a bad rap in the public discourse by being obtuse about this shit. Which, I mean, this is something that happens with all manner of leftist terminology, where people will never explain them to anyone, even other leftists, who will then use those terms incorrectly. Right, it's the meme with the guy on the bike who puts the stick in the wheel and then they go, oh, fucking goddamn CIA. Because there's leftists who think that personal property should be abolished because they don't know the difference between personal and private property because only nerds read theory. Fucking hell, man, at least try talking to people in the same language. I'm smiling right now because this is amusing to me, but I also find it very, very sad. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Subscribestar or Patreon, maybe buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, how's your NaNoWriMo going thus far? I think this video is going to come out fairly early, so if you haven't started yet, you absolutely still can. You don't have to start NaNoWriMo on the 1st. And I wish you the best of luck. I will be posting daily updates on Twitter, and I hope to actually be able to write every day. But of course, you know, sometimes you just need a day off to decompress your mind so you can be more productive in the future. And see you around, cunts!